So, in terms of critical reading or reading for criticality or any kind of evaluative purpose, we often are told to read with a question in mind. And that's true, of course, if you've watched my previous video. Questioning obviously is a part of being critical, as opposed to being passive, but it's simply not enough. Or what people get confused is the type of questions that they need to ask. So yes, criticality involves questioning. And in terms of when you are reading critically, obviously that is not completely independent of criticality in writing. So they're not independent. Reading relies heavily on writing and vice versa. And of course, the criticality is obviously a shared kind of concept between that. It's not, you don't go off and think critically for reading and then you switch that off and then come to writing. And in the kind of criticality that you have to demonstrate for writing, then you think, oh, switch on the criticality and then here it comes. So obviously that's not how it is. So it's intertwined, and obviously the questions here, they are applicable to the same kind of concept of criticality within writing. So questions that you need to ask yourself when you are reading for criticality. So of course, remember the spectrum, and there is a cheat sheet that I created which will help you organize the way you question and the levels of questioning, because we did establish that there are questions that are just kind of useless, really. They don't establish anything. They don't help you to understand anything that you didn't perhaps in the first instance. And then there is a level or grade of questioning that really helps you to get to the top notch of criticality. So in terms of questioning, of course, we want to kind of structure something that gives us a way to assess the worthiness of something. This is something that I spoke about again previously. So there are 4 key questions. Of course, these do interlap, they do overlay, and there is also room for kind of, something else that you may think actually in this particular area, this is more valid than the other concept. So reading critically, questions that you want to consider really in order to get that critical thought, so that of course you can demonstrate that within your writing, is firstly the actual validity of whatever it is that you're reading. So if it's a theory, if it's a concept, or actually if it's a publication in itself, if it's a book, if it's an article, journal, magazine, blog, whatever. And the easiest way I can kind of explain validity is if you think of the concept of fake news, particularly with YouTube, or the internet in general. The internet has given people, anyone, essentially, a platform. So all you need is basically a camera or a recording device, could even be audio, and internet connection. And then you can proclaim yourself as an expert in anything. And generally, people tend to be more passive than critical. So it's not long before you get people who rack up a following. And while that can be used for entertainment purposes, at the same time, it is in many cases dangerously misleading, because people, are not qualified to speak or give advice on so many areas, for example, finance. And in that case, you can clearly see where the trouble is here. So you need to look at validity, like how valid is the actual concept, the actual source of the concept or the theory, the actual information. And in terms of validity, obviously, we're looking at truthfulness. We're looking at, does it come from a reputable source? So if, for example, we were looking for information regarding a particular virus, so let's say a new virus that came up, and we wanted information about it, if I told you that I heard it from somebody on YouTube, you may or you may not believe it. But if you were critical about it, you would want to know the actual credentials of this person. So, who are they? Where do they come from? Perhaps what their background is. Do they have any kind of certification or qualification in the field of medical sciences? And before you kind of actually take what is told to you as fact, or even if it is fact, you will then decide the value, the worthiness of the actual information. So validity plays an important part. And from validity, so basically, this is kind of a filter. What is truth and how truthful is a truth? And then we move a step ahead and we look at credibility. So credibility is basically the extent of why or how much you should believe something. So let's take, for example, myself. Okay, anyone can give you information about anything. They go a step ahead. Anyone can actually teach you anything. A step further, anyone can actually teach you, I guess, English if they speak the language. But then, of course, if we want to break it down, who can actually teach you specialized areas in English? So whether it's, for example, academic writing, essay writing, thesis writing, research skills, dissertation skills, thesis writing, all these things, quantitative analysis, quantitative data analysis, qualitative data analysis. Who would actually teach you that? And you can say, okay, Nafisa's here. Why are you credible? Well, my credibility is obviously, if you look into it, you'll have a look at my background and my qualifications. You may want to look at my history, my experience. That's another thing, experience of the actual experts field. Another thing we look at in academic reading is we look at publications, but we also look at the quality of publications. So, for example, if somebody publishes something in a tabloid, that may or may not be true. But in terms of credibility, anybody essentially, so somebody who's a journalist for The Sun could say anything about anything they like, because it's kind of, in the capacity of free speech. Now, if you compare The Sun, just a general tabloid that talk about anything and anyone, and then you come to an actual journal. So a journal is actually an academic publication. And even within within journal publications, there are certain rankings. So there are high quality journals, and then there are medium quality journals, and then there are journals who kind of accept publications from anyone. So you look at the credibility in terms of the author's pedigree. And by pedigree, of course, if you're familiar with kind of any kind of animal breeding, pedigree means, you come from a good stock. So in terms of the author here, in terms of reading, we are looking at somebody who, pedigree here, we're talking about someone who is believable because they have a consistent history of publishing good quality, peer-reviewed articles in good quality journals. This is really important here in academic reading. Okay, reading critically in academic reading. If you are reading critically just in general reading, then of course this does apply, but it applies in a slightly different dynamic possibly. But in terms of reading critically in academia, basically, you will be looking at the author. So you'll be looking at the credibility. And in credibility, we look at the author pedigree. And pedigree basically means, we look at the institution. Universities in the world have a ranking for a reason. There is a reason for this. I won't get into the politics of it too much now. Definitely something that I'm more than happy to revisit and discuss. But whether you agree with the politics or not, there is a ranking in terms of class of universities worldwide. So we're all familiar with, the top kind of Ivy League universities in the USA, or the top universities in the UK, or universities that are referred to as Russell Group universities for particular reasons of prestige. So you look and see You can establish author credibility based on the institution that they work for, they teach or do research in. But also what you can do is look at the how much is their work peer reviewed. Now, peer review is important, and just very briefly, what it means is that the work that the author has written has been reviewed by another expert in that field. So, for example, I could potentially write what I like, and let's say, my area. Let's say my area, let's just take academic writing. So I write about how to write a good dissertation. Okay, and I tell you everything that I know. Okay, there is a fine line between it being very subjective to me and then what is universally accepted. So I could make it all about what I think and my approach. But in order to keep the balance, to keep it to the facts and to keep it to what is universally accepted, I would need somebody to kind of basically check me, really. So if you think about it, the way if somebody is completely off mark, if somebody is completely off topic, they basically get called out. And of course, it's done diplomatically. It's not done in any kind of like social media war or anything like that. But what it does is peer-reviewed journals mean that the work that the author has done has been checked and also critiqued. There, the things that are the strengths about it are validified or validated, sorry, and then things that are perhaps missing or need further clarification are picked up upon and highlighted. So it is basically balanced. It's a checks and balance system. And you can easily see when you do searches for articles or journals, you'll see which it tells you peer reviewed. So if you are looking for academic literature, then I highly suggest that if you're doing anything like a literature review or any kind of research for your own work, that you do make sure that you are looking at peer-reviewed journals. It doesn't mean to say that everything you read must be, because there are things that we call grey literature, so things like government papers or reports and things like that, and they don't fall into that area. But again, you still need to look at things like the credibility, who's the author or the agency that published this work, where does it come from, where do the statistics come from, does it come from a reputable source? If it's published by a government department, then can you verify that that is actually the people who are authorized to speak on such a topic? So we've dealt with the validity, we've come into credibility. Then moving on, another thing that you would want to consider as well is the recency of something. Now, this is not to say that if you're looking at, it really depends again on the context of what you're looking at. So if you are looking at perhaps historical information and you're dealing with, let's say, things from ancient Egypt or any kind of historical fact, then of course you would want to look at sources that are dated back. It depends on your area. If you're looking at date sensitive areas, so for example, the law always changes, especially the law in England and Wales is constantly evolving. There are cases and parliamentary acts that constantly just coming and do change. Law does change. It's very dynamic. So something that was law perhaps 6 months or 12 months or 18 months ago may no longer be enforced. So that is something that you need to check very carefully. Look, how recent is something? That's just an example. There are areas, of course, as well. So it depends. Again, even in that area, if you are looking at something that is dated, but you are aware, then that's fine. You just need to be aware that the recency of something is something that you are considering, because obviously recency does affect the validity and the credibility of something. If something was the way it was 10 years ago, and then now there is a lot of debate, things have been reformed, attitudes or perceptions have changed, then of course that gives you a huge area of critique and things that you could really poke and dig holes at and really, get really like critical, basically, essentially. Okay, so those are just some guidelines. So you want to be looking at, the validity of something, you want to look at the credibility, you want to look at the recency. And these things help you to actually critique and see to question. You're looking, to what extent is this credible? You've looked at something, to what extent is it valid? So first of all, you look at the truthfulness, you look at the, if something perhaps, and like I said, these concepts, they're not independent of each other, they all intertwine. So if something isn't valid, it may be because it's not recent. Maybe there has been new data or new information, new publications that kind of negate what has already been established. So that's something to consider and say, well, actually, there are issues concerning the validity of X because according to Y, this such and such has been established or found out or whatever. The same thing, the credibility, something may be considered to be valid, but based on what you have read, you might think, well, actually, the source from X is far more credible because the author here actually has got consistently good, high quality publications that are peer reviewed, whereas author A, perhaps, this we're talking about author B, author A hasn't done that. Author A has just posted something on Wikipedia. That's another thing, anybody can edit Wikipedia. So information from there, of course, there are issues surrounding its credibility. So there's a nice thing with Wikipedia is you can look at the footnotes. And I am not an academic who likes to shit on Wikipedia because I think Wikipedia is an amazingly resourceful tool. So while there are issues with credibility and all the things I mentioned surrounding, actual criticality of when you're reading, I don't want to, I don't want to completely shut down Wikipedia because it's something that I don't also, when I encourage my students to use it, I don't completely tell them don't use it. What I do say is be critical. When you look at information from Wikipedia, it's useful because it's done in a kind of easy format. It's an encyclopedia, so it's done in an easy format for everyone to read. A lot of academic reading can be really heavy and difficult to navigate. So Wikipedia is a good starting point, but what you need to do is follow all the things that I mentioned. And it's easy for you to do because there are footnotes and there are references, and you can check and see, does it come from a reputable source? How recent is it? So you're looking at things, you're looking, as we mentioned, you're looking at the validity, the credibility, the reliability. Yes. And again, reliability isn't independent from all the things I said. If something isn't credible, do you think it's going to be reliable? Of course it's not. If something isn't valid, is it going to be reliable? Highly unlikely. If something is not recent, is it going to be credible? Well, actually, you need to critically actually think about the different things because, like I said, depends on the concept, it depends on the information, and it depends on the bigger picture. If you're looking at something really historical, like something, archaeological sites in, 2000 BC, then of course you would want to look at a source that is really old, and you may question something that is recent as not being actually credible as something that, was found, I don't know, 100, 200 years ago. So these are the guiding kind of areas that help you to develop the questions that you want to ask in order to read more critically. Okay. And like I said, they are not independent of each other. It's not like, okay, again, I'm going to question credibility and then I'm going to move on. Let's finish that. And then I'm going to question reliability. And then I'm going to question, the recency and these are not all they overlap and they intertwine. And the good thing is I like to create cheat sheets on this because I'm a visual person. I like to see what I'm working with. So usually what I do is I create printable resources that are guides. So essentially diagrams that kind of mind map you to see the kind of questions that you are developing, and making sure that you're building into a discussion. Because like I said, academic reading isn't completely independent from academic writing. You usually are reading in order to write. Not all the time, but most of the time, you're reading receptive skills in order to be productive with writing or speaking. So nothing is entirely its own kind of entity, if that makes sense. Everything overlaps. And that is why I like, diagrams and cheat sheets. So if you head over to my blog or my Patreon, you'll find a plethora of all the cheat sheets that help you kind of guide you. And there are tutorials as well for those. So do check it out. And of course, this video is one in a series of discussing how to do the criticality, whether it's in reading or writing. So if you have liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. There will be more on this topic to come. Of course, feel free to suggest different areas, but there will be more. And what we'll be doing is here, obviously I have looked at the bigger picture, but in future videos we'll look in more detail, and we'll look at more how to just to kind of build upon the things we've touched upon. And also, because I said developing criticality is a skill that needs to be developed over time and practice. So if you have heard this or everything in this video and think, okay, but where do I begin? That's okay. That's okay. The important part is the starting, and then the second important part is developing and practicing, and that is what I'm here for. So thank you for watching, and you'll see me soon.